here. This is awesome. I am Hannah. I'm the meeting facilitator and media spokesperson for MaCCNO. So I want to talk just a little bit about who and what MaCCNO is, and then Ethan is going to actually talk about zoning and zoning and culture. So MaCCNO is the Music and Culture Coalition of New Orleans. We started a little bit over 2 years, well, almost 2.5 years ago, September of 2012. A meeting was called by Kermit Ruffins at the bar that he owned on Basin Street at the time, at the Speakeasy. And a bunch of people showed up, and then it became very clear that there was a need for lots more discussion about the ways that culture is impacted by law and policy, and that there was kind of a lack of a collective voice, or not enough voices in the discussion. So MaCCNO formed by accident out of that. We met every Wednesday for a long time, and then the work has continued, and we deal with all of the ways that the local music and culture can be impacted by law and policy. And as you can imagine, that's a lot of different things. It's a pretty big umbrella. We do noise ordinance, we do zoning ordinance, we do permitting issues, we do legal battles. You know, when someone is getting sued, we working on updating the laws, changing the language of the laws, working with city council, all these different things to try to make sure that the laws on the books and the enforcement all reflect the fact that the culture is incredibly important here in New Orleans. So that's what MaCCNO is and why MaCCNO is and sort of who MaCCNO is. And well, the who is it's a pretty varied coalition. We have musicians and other performers. We have visual artists and vendors. We have urban planners and lawyers and various folks who work in different parts of the cultural economy and concerned citizens from all over town. So it's a coalition that brings together a lot of different viewpoints, but works in the legal arena specifically for the interests of the cultural community. So that is MaCCNO, and then we've done this series of periodic teach-ins about these various things that are really important to people's livelihoods and identities, and but often the information is very daunting and very hard to find and very obtuse and not accessible the way legal information sometimes is. So we've done past teach-ins about performing on the street and all the different laws that pertain to that. We've done teach-ins about noise ordinance, and we've done past teach-ins about zoning, and now we're going to do another teach-in about zoning. This is actually one of two. There's going to be another one of these after Mardi Gras, which is going to sort of continue this, but also be a chance for people to come to that one if they weren't able to come tonight. So we'll make sure that the date of that, which is March 4th, gets kind of spread around as well. And the reason that we're doing these now is because the comprehensive zoning ordinance is getting overhauled, and Ethan's going to talk lots more about that. But this is a once-in-a-generation chance to make sure that the laws that are on the books moving forward are laws that work for the cultural community and work to nurture and foster the culture that forms the basis of our economy and forms a huge part of the identity and the heritage in this town. So that's why zoning. And so Ethan's going to talk for a little while, and then he'll take questions more specifically about zoning. Ethan is our coordinator. He has a background in urban planning. And then after he does some questions, then most of this will be discussion, just sort of talking about what we in this room need to see in the new draft of the CZO, the comprehensive zoning ordinance that's getting worked on. So that's how it's going to go. And I'll talk a little bit more about discussion guidelines as we go. One other thing is, if anybody who would like to become a MaCCNO member, we have that stuff available here tonight as well. We've got the stickers and the t-shirts and all that. And Ryan's back there, you can go holler at him. And if you become a MaCCNO member, you get a membership card that gets you discounts at cultural businesses around town, as well as supporting the work that we do. So thank you all for being here, and Ethan, go.
Thank you, Hannah. And once again, thank you for everyone being here, and thank you to Shaka and Naima for letting us host it here, and also for just having this great space. So we want to highlight that. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later on tonight. And again, my goal is to have this sort of as interactive as possible, so feel free if you have questions to raise your hand, and we'll kind of deal with it as it goes. Because I know we talked about this being sort of a call to action, not a call to listen to Ethan and Hannah talk, right? So I want to make sure that this, you know, we don't end up sort of forgetting about anything going forward. So we're going to start off with just a couple basic things about zoning, just to make sure everyone's on the same page, sort of set the floor. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of live entertainment and culture in zoning in New Orleans. Then we're going to talk some about the changes from the previous draft to the new draft of the zoning ordinance, and then kind of work on the call to action part. And that is also, again, interactive, so everyone can sort of raise points as we go and move forward. I also realized, like I said, parking is a problem, so we may have more people trickling in as the night continues. So, all right, and also if you haven't signed in, please do before you leave, because we're going to follow up with everyone via email and everything after this meeting, and then again at our second meeting as well. So first of all, zoning. What is zoning, right? Zoning is frustrating, right? Zoning is not something most people generally want to deal with unless they have to, but unfortunately, what people haven't realized historically is generally you have to deal with it if you are doing sort of any kind of activity, even if you're a musician, even if you're a traditional culture bearer, anything. Zoning can affect what you can do and what you have been able to do historically, and that's why we're here today, is because people generally haven't been involved in these processes, and that's why we got to the point where we are. Zoning really is just a legal tool, which is, and the definition that I've been using is the primary means that government regulates the built environment for the public welfare. So it affects sort of each parcel of land, each building, what you can do, what the use of that building can be. It does not regulate what happens out in the street, in the public right-of-way. Zoning doesn't have anything to do with that. So parading necessarily doesn't have to do with zoning. However, the clubhouse from which you come out of would be affected by zoning, right? So there's a correlation, but it doesn't directly impact it. Zoning controls things like land use. It controls building size. It can control the placement of building on a lot, how far you can be back from the street or have to be back from the street. So in New Orleans, you see a lot of places in the neighborhoods that are right up against the sidewalk, but in Gentilly, you see places that are set back and much more separated, and a lot of that is actually explained in the zoning laws themselves. And so the way that the physicality of the structures actually work can affect what can happen and how the culture works in those spaces as well. So if you think about if you're in a big warehouse sort of out in New Orleans East, the impact of a band playing there could be very different than, say, a band at the Candlelight, which is right out front, right outside the sidewalk, right? So there is a variation there in the way things work. And that's, again, why people need to think through these issues. Zoning, however, does not control what an individual can do within something, right? So zoning doesn't control if you can, do 100 cartwheels, or if you can yell, or whatever you are. Winter time does not control personal action. It controls what you can do as the use of the building. So it can control whether or not you can open a restaurant. It can't control whether you cook chicken or shrimp, right? Those things are not in the zoning ordinance. And that's a key point we're going to come back to as well, is that it can't control your sort of personal ability to do things. Your personal freedoms are not affected. Again, it doesn't regulate what you can do in a public right-of-way, and it governs land use, urban design within a specific jurisdiction, and it can change from area to area. Obviously, zoning in New Orleans is not like the zoning in Baton Rouge or anywhere else. It's very, very place-based, and place-based within neighborhoods of the city. So you see the zoning in the French Quarter, in Tremé, Bywater, Marigny is very different than the zoning in Gentilly, New Orleans, East, Lakeview. They're built at different times, they have different needs, and they essentially run differently on a day-to-day structure. But there are a couple things that are important to know about sort of types of activity. One is the difference between permitted and conditional use, right? Permitted use, they also say like you can do it by right, which means if something is permitted in that thing, if a restaurant is permitted, you can open a restaurant. But you still have to go through the rest of sort of the ordinances and the other permits and the stuff you've got to get, but you can do it. If a laundromat is permitted, it is permitted. Doesn't mean you need a permit to do it. It means you can do it via zoning, but there are other things you might do along the way, if that makes sense. Conditional use means there's a next step in the process. It means you might be able to do it, but you have to go through the City Planning Commission, who will offer a recommendation as to whether or not you can do it, which is not a binding recommendation. It goes then to the City Council, who will then vote and decide whether or not you can do it. So what it does, it adds a next step between your application and actually opening your business. So it gives neighbors a chance to come in and talk about it. It gives the City Council a chance to weigh in. It gives all these people a chance to weigh in, see what you can do for good or bad, right? It can also give away, it's also a point when people can start to object to your business. and object to what you're doing. You're going to have a lot of provisos in that business to say, yes, you can open up a bar, but you can't have live entertainment, or you have to close by 10, or you can't have bill cups is one that's come up a lot. All those things come up a lot within that process. There's also things that are not allowed, and that's just that simple. You can't do it. But there's also something called non-conforming use. And what non-conforming use is something that a lot of times used to be allowed but no longer is. They call it was grandfathered in. So you see sort of businesses that are outliers, that they can't be there anymore via a new use, but an old sort of historic uses was able to see. A lot of corner barrooms, etc., that are in that space. And what happens then is you have 6 months in sort of, if it closes for more than 6 months, you can't reopen. And this becomes a real danger with neighborhood bars because, and a lot of uses, because if you can essentially be shut down for 6 months, you can't reopen as a non-conforming use. You have to conform to what the existing zoning is. So that's been sort of a way that a lot of bars have gone through attrition, is that they've been closed, someone tried to reopen, they said, no, you can't be a bar, you have to be whatever. A lot of times it will be something, you know, much sort of lower intensity in a sense. It might be, you know, maybe a pet shop or whatever, right? So at this point, I guess I would think, are there questions on any of the basic stuff that we kind of need to run through, or that people kind of feel like we're on the same page going forward? All right, good. So then I want to talk a little bit about sort of the history of live entertainment in New Orleans and how we got to where we are. And again, if you have questions, please sort of interrupt. And I don't know, obviously, every piece of it, but it's sort of the general piece. We're doing a lot of research, going back even into the city archives and looking at, you know, historic times, and just sort of looking at how this developed. And what I've discovered is almost nobody really knows. Even when I meet with the City Planning Commission, a lot of people just don't know really the full history of it. And so we've been working with them to kind of piece it together. Because to be honest, you know, people didn't think about the way that zoning and live entertainment or the culture worked together very much until more recently. And a lot of it didn't come from the people that create the culture. It came from people that felt they were impacted a lot of times negatively by it. And so that's been an issue moving forward. So, excuse me. So before 1970, there was a lot of sort of attempts at regulating culture in New Orleans in some ways. So, you know, they were a little bit more haphazard, they were different spaces, but if you look at, say, the creation of Storyville, a lot of Storyville was a way to push that culture into a certain area and activities in a certain area and not allow them in other places to kind of sort of almost corral it. And unfortunately, things like live entertainment were often seen as a nuisance. And so you put them all together and, you know, where bad things happen and attracting a criminal element and all these things. I've heard, and amazingly, I read a document from, the late 90s that referenced live entertainment attracting criminality, right? And so this is something that somehow came up in maybe the late 1800s, and still is something that continues today as sort of, and that's also a lot of where the idea of live entertainment as a community problem rather than a community asset happened. So there's always been that live entertainment is something we have to deal with and have to figure out how to deal with, rather than something that we can actually see as a benefit. Because I think most people in this room would agree that live entertainment and that the culture of New Orleans is a community asset. It's a neighborhood asset. It's something we want to see grow and encourage, not something that needs to be dealt with and contained, right? Certainly, you know, there needs to be a variety of uses, but the culture of New Orleans is one that is inherent of New Orleans, part of its identity. It needs to be encouraged. So, you know, that's before 1970. Sort of, New Orleans grew up sort of organically. There were a lot of uses that happened together. In 1970, New Orleans created the draft of the CZO, the zoning ordinance that's in effect now. And they did that specifically, a lot of ways, to separate the uses of New Orleans. So,
Was there any zoning before that?
There were two ordinances that happened previous to that. And honestly, I haven't read them. You'd have to find them and track them down. But there was one, I believe, in the late 20s, and then one in the early 50s. So the CZO, the 70 CZO is the third attempt at the zoning ordinance, and this would now be the fourth. And there were changes along the way, but yeah, there were. And zoning itself was, well, let me remember my schooling now. You know, it was the late 20s or something that zoning actually happened for the first time ever in New York and then spread out. So it was zoning itself is a little less than 100 years old. So we had one fairly early on. What made the one in 1970 kind of special was it was created partly to separate the uses. So you see a lot of neighborhood shops coming together on housing and sort of these mixed use in neighborhoods. This was creating a lot of it to separate that out. And so it didn't allow for that anymore. And partly because of the rise of the car, the automobile, that they thought we didn't need to do that anymore because you could drive everywhere. And so that's antithetical to what New Orleans is and also to what people are trying to move back to, right? We talk a lot about mixed use neighborhoods and walking to the store and neighborhood stuff, and this was an attempt to separate that. Now we're trying to get back to that. So what the 1970 ordinance did on that was, it's also the basis of what we're dealing with today. That law is still the basis of what we're dealing with. So, what is that, 45 years ago that it was created? So it needs some updating, and that's true. But it also started to, as far as I know, for the first time, talk about live entertainment. So in the 1970 ordinance, it also said for the first time that bars in residentially commercial districts, so anywhere where there's sort of just a neighborhood strip next to it, could not have live entertainment. That was in that zoning ordinance from 1970. However, nobody, as far as I know, really gave that much mind for about 7 years. And in 1977, there were a group of neighbors that were upset about bars, a strip developing on Maple Street. And it was a lot of college students, and they had an entertainment sort of district there. And it was growing, and they felt like it was growing out of what the neighborhood could carry, and was a nuisance. So what they did is they crafted an ordinance. They got their council member at the time to write an ordinance to, instead of permitting bars in a neighborhood business district, to make it a conditional use, which itself is, it can make sense, right? If too many bars can sort of burden the neighborhood if they're not ready for it. However, he also added a special provision that said live entertainment will be prohibited. Even though it was, they did it again, and this started to call attention to the fact that neighborhood bars could not have live entertainment. And immediately once this passed, they had, and you may have heard of this before, they had a coalition of neighborhood groups that came together from different parts of the city. And from that coalition, they lobbied their council member to kind of make this change happen. And I've actually found the transcript of the planning meeting where this happens, and you've got people coming and speaking in it. There was only one musician that was there who had heard of it just a few days ago, who was the president of the musicians union at the time, and his comments were basically, this will put musicians out of work. I don't understand why you're targeting live entertainment specifically, and you should have talked to us long ago. And this was now 37 years ago, and things really haven't changed. It was amazing to find that, because that's exactly what some of the same arguments are now. It's just something that happened to be there, and of course, they didn't pay me to mind, they passed it, and almost immediately after they passed that, you start to see things popping up of bars and venues being sued and being shut down for having live entertainment. So what their arguments are two. One, that the bars violated the noise ordinance, and two, that they should not have been permitted to have live entertainment in the first place because it was illegal. So that started to shut down venues, and you can follow the progression going forward.
Now, was that city-instigated prosecution, or was that civil suits?
Mostly it was civil suits. So actually you see a lot of it coming from, once again, honestly, neighborhood organizations. Once again, are the ones that are launching a lot of these suits to close things down. And so I'm developing actually a list of places that have been targeted and shut down, and they are actually listed. There was the Fado Dough Bar, which was one of the ones that was the initial target of this. Tyler's Beer Garden had a suit against it. Even the Parkview Tavern on Carrollton had live music. They were forced to shut down because they weren't zoned correctly for it, and the council member up there at the time said it attracted the criminal element. So it's amazing that you see the same thing popping up over and over and over again. And now even there's sort of a trend that continues. So even in Tremé, what you see a lot of the neighborhood bars in Tremé that used to be zoned, once they changed this zoning and called attention you couldn't have live entertainment in a neighborhood bar, once they closed for whatever reason, they could never reopen. And so you've got places that are historic venues like Little People's Place. Little People's Place that used to have live entertainment is now open as a bar, but they can't have live entertainment anymore. Joe's Cozy Corner, when it closed down, couldn't reopen as a bar and couldn't have live entertainment. So,
Ethan,
yeah.
You know, no one has really presented something as simple as I could take a live band, put them in a live venue, legal live venue, record it, or just listen to it, pipe it in, and play it as live music
That's
over a thing, and I have the exact same sound.
That's
But
right.
I'm not allowed to do it in person. I mean, this is all wrong.
That's exactly
legally.
right.
And I think that that's really what underlined the crime. I reopened Donna's, and because of a lawsuit, it was only $35,000 into the lawsuit, after it was reopened and fully permitted, a neighbor found a technicality 2 years earlier from the previous owner,
That's right.
and all we had to do was go to appeals court for another $100,000, and we had the problem solved.
That's right. So you
but-
beat me to the punch, so yes.
But two of my friends were actually in the appellate courts, and we were looking forward to getting your appeal, because we were just gonna tell you, what's the difference between piped-in music and live music? What's the difference? They have the city's whole underlying premise that because it's live, you can't create live and dead. I mean, there's no alternative. So I'm still wondering when we're gonna have to organize ourselves legally. I mean, there's a lot of people who just push us around because they've got money. And we need to create a fund that defends this position. And the principal position here is not the zoning. It's just the simple fact that I can turn my volume up like this in my bar, but I can't have a live person playing the exact same thing. That's just not right, and we haven't defended our position on it. I'm sort of turn this on, it's not really a zoning issue, because that's basically what's happening throughout the whole zoning ordinance. It assumes that you can stop people from being live,
Right.
but you otherwise can do it exactly the same way.
That's right. And
And that's a very interesting discriminatory thing, which once again is just wrong.
That's right.
And I think it hasn't been brought out that they need to delete the word live.
Mhm.
It's either no music
That's right.
Or music.
or music.
That's right.
Live is not the issue, and that's unfortunately, and by the way, I apologize to everybody. I think the biggest obstacle we have to live music is volume.
Mhm.
And if anybody said, well, what do we do to do with it? Well, how about insulate your building?
Mhm.
You know, how about put a double set of doors so that when your door opens, one door is open, one door is closed? So, I mean, that's 99%. The rest of it, when people come and complain about live music, it's just bullshit.
I'm not sure you're
So-
right, right? Because
I don't have to be right, it's my opinion.
Right, exactly. So listen, everyone is gonna.
All right, so I'll do one too.
Yeah, it's just my opinion.
The problem that you have is not whether people are live or not live. I mean, that is, it of course is, but you're still going to deal with the people that are, you know, put the plaintiffs in your list of the lawsuits, right? Because you're dealing with belief systems in these people. You're dealing with religious fanatics of a kind. VC Fora doesn't care whether it's live or not live, or recorded, or comes from the spirit world, and it goes through sound. They just don't want you to do it, whatever it is you can't do.
No music in the churches. I'm tired of that.
You know, they just want to shut every
Stop
damn
singing.
thing down. You know, and then if you point out that the volume is this or the volume is, it's not going to convert those people to sanity. They're not going to change
But
what
I
they
think
do.
what you brought up, you sort of skip to, you know, one of our endpoints, but that's perfect because it is an issue about, you know, it's talking about the issue of sound, right? There's a noise ordinance that regulates how loud something can be.
Yeah.
And right, so no matter what it is, it regulates how loud it can be from that, whether you're on the street, whether you're here. If you violate the noise ordinance, you violate the noise ordinance. If you have if you have your boombox, I don't know if people still have boomboxes, but whatever they have.
Yeah, that's back.
One guy down on Bourbon Street.
That's right. But if you have that and it's cranked, you know, to 100 decibels, they're breaking the law, right? If it's at, you know, what is it? If it's at like, what's it? 70 decibels is the thing? No, there's a lot of figures in there. But essentially, if they go right under the noise ordinance, they're not. And if you're playing an instrument, it's the same thing wherever you are, right? So that distinction is false, and we talk about it quite a bit, is that the live aspect doesn't make any sense.
Delete live.
Right.
And the unamplified doesn't make any sense. That other one makes
Right.
sense.
Exactly. In fact, we're negotiating on a policy for the French market, and they quite willingly struck the amplified conflict in their policy when I explained why it doesn't work. But one thing that I think we have to keep in mind always is that it's not really an issue of zoning or anything else, but at our very first meeting, Mary Hall told us it was an issue of three things: noise, parking, and litter. And once you deal with those three things, that should clear up 99% of the complaints.
That's right. And so let me just at one point is they actually never defined in the zoning ordinance what live entertainment was until 1994. So in that, they didn't even know what they were saying, what objecting to until for 2 decades, right? And the reason that came up, that definition was created, was because in the quarter there were 2 bars that were having drag shows, and people were upset about it. It was Mississippi River Bottom and the Corner Pocket were having drag shows in the quarter. And they didn't know a way that they could stop them because they weren't defined in the CZO as anything. And so what they did is they created a definition of live entertainment that was everything. It was literally, it's mime, it's poetry, it is playing an instrument, it is magic, it is dance, it is sports, it is anything you can do and perform in front of someone is illegal. So right now in most of New Orleans, you can't do poetry readings in coffee shops. Right now, because this is a public meeting, I can speak to you, but if I start to recite a poem, I'm breaking the law, literally. Right, and so it's real, and I think it was created in a way that they could put a stop to something that was created badly. It wasn't thought through. It's clearly wouldn't hold up in court, but somehow it continues. And it's, since '94, it's continued in that way, and it was another tool to say, all right, we need to put a stop to this, and it's time that these things need to change, right? And so this is the opportunity in which we can do that, because this is essentially a rewrite, essentially a reboot of that. Unfortunately, we don't get to write it all. We just get to react and tell them what needs to change, right? So let's jump to a couple things that are changed in the new CZO. And one thing that I think I want to point out is that this is it is somewhat of an improvement of the 1970, the previous law. That doesn't mean it's good, it just means it's slightly better than what's the really bad thing we have, right? And so we need to continue to push to make it better. What they changed is they did finally change the definition of live entertainment. And I think I actually have them here so I can, let's see. All right, let me tell you what the one that's currently on the books includes. It includes theatrical productions, athletic contests, exhibitions, pageants, concerts, recitals, circuses, karaoke, bands, combos, and other live musical performances, audience participation contests, floor shows, literature readings, dancing, fashion shows, comedy or magic acts, mime, and the playing of recorded music, disc records or tapes by an employee, guest, or other individual, one of whose function is the playing of recorded music who is in verbal communication with the clientele of the establishment. All of those things are illegal. So that's the other thing, is DJing is also included in live entertainment, sure.
Did I hear that right? If you did a trivia game at St. Rock, that's considered live entertainment?
Audience participation, so.
Wow.
So right.
Who wrote this law?
I've actually found, I'll put it on our website, we actually found the document that they used to create this definition
please
with
do.
some annotation. So a lot of stuff we're going to post eventually so you can actually see the process being made. Our website is MaCCNO.com. So it's fairly easy to find, and we have a document section, so we're working on scanning and uploading a lot of these things and organizing it so you can find it, but you can actually trace a lot of these things as they develop.
We dedicate on Clarkson.
I'll say. Anyway, so the new one, and there's a couple times there's a couple things that are exempted. Exempted periodic entertainment by schools, churches, and nonprofit organizations. Live entertainment at weddings is okay, and religious events within certain facilities based upon a rational impact analysis justifying different treatment. So that's exempt. The current new definition, which is better but still needs work, it defines it as the following live performances performed by one or more persons, whether or not done for compensation, and whether or not admission is charged. They are musical act, theatrical player act, including stand-up comedy and magic, dance clubs, and disc jockey performances using vinyl records, compact discs, computers, or digital music players.
Good God.
So still, if you plug in your iPad, your iPad, you can't curate the songs. It has to come from either someone else's playlist or a jukebox somehow doesn't count as live entertainment. I don't know why, but so there are these strange idiosyncrasies that still don't make sense. There's a big change though in the way that live entertainment works. There's a couple changes that are important. One, for the first time, it makes it permissible to play an instrument in your own home for your own enjoyment. So before, you could actually really violate the law by playing your instrument at your house or having band practice.
It happened recently. Someone
Yeah.
got a ticket violating the noise ordinance for playing his guitar in his living room.
What?
Seriously?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
It's like the guy getting charged for
The
the cheeseburger driving.
driving.
you know.
right, that's what
Yeah.
and that's why these things sound good, but if it's real. And the thing is, if these are on the books, they can be used in a way, and sometimes are used in a way that can seem egregious, but are actually legal, right? And so you can work to get it thrown out based, if you can get a lawyer to come and help you get it thrown out based on sort of the badness of this law, then it works. But if you can't, what do? You pay the ticket and move on because you can't pay legal fees, you can't do that, you just want to get it done. And then maybe you stop practicing at your house because you can't afford another ticket. There's a couple of other
Maybe
key,
become an accountant.
but the other key change that has become most controversial, I would say, is that it allows unamplified, three-piece unamplified music permitted in a standard specialty restaurant, except within the French Quarter. So the French Quarter, it's an expanded. So the unamplified. So this is the question. This is the. I was going to represent a second. There's a little bit of a question as to whether it is actually three pieces or if just any. It would just open up still and is permitted to play unamplified music within restaurants. We're looking at it, and that's just what my notes had. But so what it would do is if you have a restaurant, you could have music while people are eating. You could not charge admission, you couldn't do this, but someone could play the piano. Somebody could have a jazz trio, right now unamplified, come in, and we'll talk a little bit about the issue with unamplified in a second. But what it does actually opens up opportunities for some of these things. It doesn't mean you can have a live music venue. It means somebody can come in and perform, literally play the piano while you're eating. And I think the idea that someone's going to come in and have a brass band the entire time while everyone is dining just probably isn't going to happen because how many restaurants are people going to sit down and literally want to have a brass band playing the entire time? They may want to talk, they may want to do something, and then go see a brass band afterwards, right? And I think, that's become sort of one of the sticking points is this idea of opening up where music can happen and letting music happen in these restaurants, because a lot of times what you hear is people saying it sort of opens the floodgates and people will abuse it and then it will turn into a nightclub because it also expands the hours of operation and the ability to have alcohol. So we're going to talk about it less because there's a little bit less of our issue, but it also allows restaurants to sell alcohol by right, right? But that's something we haven't talked about as much because there's a correlation between alcohol and music a lot because it happens in places that serve alcohol, and that's real. But the idea that just because this has happened is open Pandora's box, and now we're going to have every restaurant in town can turn into a nightclub, and it was just going to be pandemonium and chaos. Just isn't. It's not going to happen, right? I mean, I think we can realize that it's not going to happen, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about that issue in a minute. I just want to quick run through this. It also adds and changes some of the arts and cultural overlays. Frenchman Street is sort of the typical arts and cultural overlay, the one everyone knows about. There's one on St. Claude, which it changes significantly. And there's, Ferret Street is one currently as well. This would add one on Broad Street. It would add one in Algiers, and I can't remember which street. And St. Bernard. And then also there's one in Tremé that it allows. It's the only one that's not a strip. It would allow some live entertainment in certain businesses within Tremé that are historically businesses. And I used to have that list, but I've now forgotten maybe how many parcels it is. But it's not a tremendous amount. It's a few places that can now offer music, and that's the only one that is a neighborhood sort of that is off the commercial strip. And Julia, sorry.
Hey, can you just backtrack it for a second?
Yeah.
I want to make sure I heard you right. Did you say that the way the new ordinance is written, that you can have live entertainment in a restaurant everywhere except for the border?
That's correct.
That makes sense.
So right,
And
and let's be clear, you can still do it. There's still a few strips that you can do. You can do it on Bourbon Street. Then the VCE zone, which is Iberville to St. Anne.
What is VCE?
VCE is the Vucare Entertainment District. It's Bourbon Street. It only is basically placed at front on 7 blocks of Bourbon.
And then also the House of Blues.
The area where the House of Blues is across the street on both sides.
Yep. So a
I'm
couple
the
blocks
one
up.
that I'm the one that actually pulled and got the license to Antoine's. And it was interesting because we had people testify that they'd actually, we had functions there going back, we just went back 40 years.
Mhm.
But the city actually then participated on Antoine's side, saying that they had legally issued us the permit, but it's now 3 years of lawsuits against Antoine's to have what you guys know is normal.
That's right.
So, and by the way, we abut what's the music club? What's the lady's name? The oldest lady on Prince Owens? Pardon me? Owens? Miss Owens, yeah, Miss Owens. The oldest, she is actually in the zone, and we're abutting the property, but we're not
Right.
allowed to do what we've been doing. But anyway, that's crazy.
Right, and it
But
affects.
I don't see a coalition of the French Quarter fighting to make it happen, even though it makes perfect sense. A lot of people just operating without permission.
Mm. And I think what this does is essentially then pulls that. It won't necessarily pull it back, but if they become, like we talk a lot about the idea of things being grandfathered in. And we don't even know what this would look like, but it would essentially allow them to, if they had to start enforcing it, there would be no other new place in the core that would allow live entertainment. It would sort of create this place that people that had it could do it, but if you're literally next door, you can't. So it creates this weird competition that is, and it's the only place in the city that creates that.
One last thing.
Yeah, please go
I
ahead.
think that you said, what if everybody could do it?
Mm.
I think a lot of restaurants would do it for lunch or weekends or Fridays or Saturdays, and they would have something in the evening, some light entertainment. And, but most of them now know there's an obstacle, and sometimes a big one, including they would be sued.
Right.
But, I mean, we could add another 100 to 500 gigs a night.
That's right.
But if we just simply, but anyway, I'm prepared for this organization to get into the fight mode.
Mhm.
I'm not sure so many people here are,
Mhm.
but this is the time to get it right.
That's right. I agree. It is the time
Yes.
to get it right. Ashley?
Sorry, I'm gonna dovetail on what you said, and I'm sick, so I'm like, yeah, fuzzy, and I'm gonna get up and go, because I'm like, yeah. But just more is what you said, fight mode, I think that's what you all, when you're doing a great job of explaining what the CBO is doing right now. I think what you need to do is to figure out how you become transformational about